Black Janitor gave a stranger bus money. He had no idea she was a billion-dollar CEO. Subscribe for more stories. He offered her money for the bus, completely unaware that she was a wealthy corporate executive who was about to fall deeply in love with him. The first heavy drop of rain splattered on the pavement, just as Imani Carter released a sigh of pure frustration. She wondered if the day could possibly get any worse. For what felt like the 100th time, she dug through her designer handbag with a rising sense of alarm. Inside, she found lipstick, a jangling set of keys, and a lone business card, but no wallet. To make matters worse, her phone was completely dead. She pressed her eyes shut, forcing a calm she didn't feel. Imani prided herself on being in command of her company, her life, and every detail within it. Today, however, fate seemed intent on testing the limits of her control. She had just concluded a pivotal meeting with investors, and somewhere in the blur of hailing and exiting a taxi, her wallet had vanished. Without credit cards or cash, she was now stranded at a bus stop miles from her upscale neighborhood, unable to pay the fare. And, naturally, the sky had decided to open up. She glared at the clouds in annoyance. Several feet away, Malik Thompson shifted his weight, quietly observing the striking woman's dilemma. She was a stark contrast to her surroundings. That elegant coat and those sharp, confident features seemed entirely out of place against the grime of a city bus shelter. Malik had lived in this city long enough to recognize the quiet hum of wealth when he saw it. He couldn't help but wonder what had put a woman like her in such a bind. He watched her exhale sharply, her knuckles white as she gripped her bag strap, her shoulders squared as if bracing for a battle. She clearly wasn't the type to ask for help. And yet he heard himself speak. "Need a hand?" Imani turned, startled by the deep, warm voice beside her. A tall, lean man with kind brown eyes stood there, dressed in worn jeans and a simple black hoodie. His short-cropped hair was neat, and his gaze was calm and observant. There was nothing outwardly remarkable about him, except for the genuine compassion in his expression. Imani hesitated for a moment. She began, clearing her throat. "It seems I've misplaced my wallet." Malik nodded, as if this confirmed his suspicions. "Anyone nearby you can call for a ride?" She swallowed her pride and confessed, "My phone is dead." A soft chuckle escaped him. "Tough day, huh?" Imani let out a huff. "You have no idea." For a brief moment, Malik considered his options. He had just a few dollars in his pocket, enough for his own ride home after a long shift. But this stranger, this woman who radiated a strength that was currently failing her, seemed to need it more. Without another word, he reached into his pocket, retrieved a couple of crumpled bills and some change, and extended his hand. "Here," he said plainly, "for the bus." Imani blinked, looking from the money to his face and back again. She was at a loss for words. People didn't just offer help like this. Not in her world. Not to her. She searched his face for a hidden motive, a catch, but found only sincere earnestness. Finally, with a small, defeated breath, Imani accepted the money. "Thank you." Malik simply shrugged. "It's just a few bucks, but to Imani, it felt like so much more." "Please, let me repay you," she insisted, already calculating how she could track him down. He chuckled again, shaking his head. "Don't worry about it. Just do something nice for someone else one day." His response stopped her cold. He wanted nothing from her. For reasons she couldn't explain, her chest felt tight. Before she could protest further, the bus rumbled to a stop. Imani paused, then stepped aboard. As the doors hissed shut, she looked back. Through the rain-streaked window, she saw Malik still standing there, hands shoved in his pockets, watching her depart. He had no clue, no idea that he had just handed his last few dollars to a woman who could have purchased the entire transit authority. And for the first time in a very long time, Imani felt a strange and unfamiliar sensation. She felt humbled, and surprisingly, she didn't mind it at all. Imani Carter was not accustomed to dwelling on brief encounters with strangers. Her life was a meticulously orchestrated symphony of high-stakes decisions and strategic planning, with no room for distractions. Yet, as she sat in her sleek penthouse office the following morning, reviewing quarterly projections. Her thoughts kept drifting back to the man at the bus stop. To Malik, there was an authenticity about him, a quiet strength that resonated with her. She'd met countless men in tailored suits who measured every word, whose kindness always came with a price tag. But Malik had offered his last few dollars without a second thought, not for personal gain or because he knew who she was, but out of simple decency. She sighed, shaking her head. Why was this one small act consuming her thoughts? Her contemplation was interrupted by the buzz of the intercom. Ms. Carter, her assistant's voice crackled. The department heads are assembled in the conference room. Imani took a deep breath, smoothing the lines of her power suit. Time to get back to business. The conference room buzzed with the familiar energy of corporate power. Executives murmured amongst themselves, the scent of expensive coffee hanging in the air. As Imani entered, her presence commanded immediate silence. All eyes turned to her. She took her place at the head of the polished mahogany table, acknowledging her team with a nod. But then, her gaze fell upon something unexpected. A familiar figure stood at the far end of the room by a maintenance panel. A man in navy blue work overalls was adjusting a toolbox. Imani's breath caught in her throat. It was Malik. For a second, she thought her mind was playing tricks on her, but then he glanced up. Their eyes met for a fleeting moment, and it was nothing. No flicker of recognition, no shock that the woman he'd helped was now presiding over this meeting. Malik simply offered a respectful, impersonal nod and returned to his task, as if she were just another executive in a building full of them. Imani, however, felt as though the air had been stolen from her lungs. For the remainder of the meeting, Imani was only partially present. She went through the motions, absorbing reports and approving proposals, but a part of her mind was stuck on a loop, replaying that single, astonishing moment. Malik worked here, in her company. The sheer improbability of it was staggering. When the meeting concluded, Imani lingered, watching as Malik packed up his tools. An impulse she didn't fully understand urged her not to let this be their last interaction. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice even and professional. Malik paused and looked up. "Yes, ma'am." Imani nearly laughed. If only he knew. She drew herself up. "What is your name?" He hesitated briefly before responding. "Malik Thompson, ma'am." Imani nodded, as if hearing it for the first time. "How long have you been with Carter Enterprises?" "About a year," he replied, his grip tightening on his toolbox. He seemed wary, unaccustomed to attention from the C-suite. "Good," she said, offering no explanation. "I'll see you around, Malik." With that, she turned and walked away before she could overthink it, a tiny, irrepressible smile playing on her lips. A week later, Imani found herself unconsciously scanning the hallways for Malik. She'd catch glimpses of him, up on a ladder, changing a bulb, checking a vent. But he never looked at her with any recognition. To him, she was just the boss. Then one evening, while reviewing her emails, a subject line caught her eye. "Employee complaint, Malik Thompson issue, insubordination." Imani's brow furrowed as she clicked open the file. The report, filed by Supervisor Terrence Wells, stated that Malik had argued about unsafe working conditions in the facility. Her fingers curled around her mouse. Of course, she could picture it perfectly. Malik standing his ground, refusing to back down from what he believed was right. She scrolled down. Recommended action, suspension. Imani's jaw clenched. Not on her watch. In minutes, she had drafted a new email. Asterisk from CEO Imani Carter. Subject, review of Malik Thompson complaint. Asterisk it read. Asterisk, I will be personally reviewing the complaint regarding Malik Thompson before any action is taken. Note disciplinary measures are to be implemented until further notice. Asterisk, she hit send without a moment's hesitation. Malik would never know she had intervened, but that didn't matter. Imani was not about to let a good man be punished for his integrity. For the first time in ages, Imani began to look forward to the small, unplanned moments of her day. Not the high-powered meetings or investor calls, but the potential for a chance encounter with Malik Thompson. It started subtly. She began taking a longer route to her office, one that led her past the maintenance workshops. She'd find reasons to call for assistance with things she could easily handle herself. A thermostat that needed adjusting, a flickering overhead light. And each time, Malik would appear. Initially, he was strictly professional, his manner polite but distant, seemingly unfazed by her title. To him, she was just another job ticket. But slowly, the formal facade began to crack. One afternoon, Imani was standing by her office thermostat, pretending to be perplexed. "This blasted thing is stuck again," she muttered just as Malik happened to walk past her open door. He quirked an eyebrow. "You sure you're not just hitting the wrong button?" Imani feigned indignation, crossing her arms. "I think I can operate a thermostat. Thank you very much." A smirk played on his lips as he stepped inside. "I don't know. You seem like the type to overcomplicate things." Imani had to suppress a smile as he effortlessly reset the system. "There," he said. "Your corporate empire can now proceed at a comfortable 72 degrees. She rolled her eyes. "I'm eternally in your debt." Malik let out a soft chuckle. "I'll add it to your tab." And just like that, the ice between them began to thaw. Over the following weeks, Imani learned more about him. She learned that he worked 2 jobs to make rent, that he'd once dreamed of being an engineer but couldn't afford the tuition, and that he was raising his younger sister after their parents had passed. He never complained. He simply accepted his reality with a quiet resilience that Imani found both admirable and deeply frustrating. She wanted to tell him he deserved so much more, that life didn't have to be such a struggle. But she sensed his pride wouldn't allow him to accept a handout. So, she simply listened. And somewhere in those conversations, she stopped seeing him as the maintenance guy. One evening, as Malik was finishing a late shift, he stepped outside and saw her. Imani was on the sidewalk, talking with a man in an impeccably tailored suit. A moment later, a sleek, black luxury sedan purred to the curb. Without hesitation, Imani slid into the back seat. Malik frowned, a knot of confusion forming in his stomach. Something about the scene felt off. At work, she was professional but approachable, never flaunting her position. But that car and the effortless way she commanded the space around her didn't add up. For the first time, Malik truly wondered, who was Imani Carter? The answer came the next day. Malik was wrestling with a stubborn vending machine when he overheard 2 office workers in the break room. "Did you catch Imani's interview in Forbes?" one asked. "Oh, yeah," the other replied. "She's a genius. Running a billion-dollar company at 30? Incredible." Malik went still, his ears tuning in. He pretended to be absorbed in his work as they continued. "She's so different from the old guard CEOs," the first one said. "No flas, no scandals. Just brilliant and tough as nails." The other laughed. "For real, Imani Carter is a force of nature." Imani Carter. The name echoed in his mind. Malik's hand tightened on his wrench. Every interaction they'd shared flashed before his eyes. Their easy banter, the quiet moments, and then the image of her getting into that expensive car. She wasn't just another employee. She was the employee, the CEO, and he'd had absolutely no idea. Malik had always prided himself on being a good judge of character, but this blindsided him completely. He had spent weeks getting to know Imani, believing she was an ambitious but down-to-earth colleague, someone he could be real with, free from the posturing of the corporate world. Now he saw the truth. She was the CEO, a woman from a world so far removed from his own, it was almost laughable. And the worst part? She had never told him. He wasn't naive. He knew powerful people had their reasons for keeping their identities under wraps. But Imani had felt different, genuine. Had this all been some kind of social experiment for her? A bit of amusement at the expense of the poor maintenance guy who didn't know who he was talking to? Malik didn't have the answers, but one thing became painfully clear. He needed to create some distance. The next time Imani saw Malik, the shift was palpable. Gone was the easy smirk, the playful banter, the way he used to look at her, as if she were just Imani. His greetings were now curt, his responses clipped. He found excuses to leave whenever she approached. At first, she thought she was imagining it, but it happened again and again. Every attempted conversation was met with a polite but firm wall. Every shared glance was deflected. and it stung in a way she hadn't anticipated. One evening, frustrated and restless after another awkward encounter, she didn't head for her car. Instead, she went down to the sublevel workshops. She found him with his back to her, shirt damp with sweat, arms deep in the guts of a massive, malfunctioning HVAC unit. The air in the room was stifling, but he worked with a fierce, focused intensity. For a moment, she just watched. This was the real Malik. Hard-working, proud, and stubborn. And yet, beneath the strength, she could see the weight he carried in the tense line of his shoulders and the exhaustion in his posture. Acting on instinct, she stepped forward. "Need a hand with that?" Malik froze. He turned slowly, his brown eyes dark and unreadable. "What are you doing down here, Imani?" His voice was low, almost a whisper. She hesitated, then knelt beside him. "I thought you could use some help." A short, mirthless laugh escaped him. "Right, because the CEO of Carter Enterprises has time to fix air conditioners." Imani flinched at the acid in his tone. "I'm the same person, Malik," she said softly. He exhaled sharply, raking a hand over his head. "No, you're not." Imani swallowed. "I never lied to you." "You didn't have to," he muttered. "You just let me believe something that wasn't true." She wanted to defend herself, to explain, but before she could, Malik stood, wiping his greasy hands on his pants. He looked at her, truly looked at her, as if for the first time. Then, in a voice laced with quiet finality, he said, "We're from two different worlds, Imani." And with that, he walked away, leaving her alone in the sweltering heat of the utility room. Imani Carter was not a woman who gave up on something she wanted, and she wanted Malik Thompson to see how wrong he was. She didn't care about his paycheck, or their social statuses, or any of the other walls he was so determined to build between them. But Malik refused to believe her, and Imani was determined to tear those walls down. One afternoon, she made her move. She found him in the maintenance office reviewing work orders and leaned casually against the doorframe. "Hey," she said, her voice light. Malik barely glanced up. "Hey." She ignored his chilliness. "I was wondering if you had time for coffee. I need to pick your brain about something." He finally looked up, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Coffee? What?" Imani shrugged. "It's that thing people do when they have a conversation. Come on." He studied her for a long, skeptical moment before sighing in defeat. "Fine, a small victory." They sat across from each other in a small cafe far from the corporate tower. For the first time in weeks, some of the tension eased from his shoulders. They talked about movies, about music, about the city, anything but work. For a little while, Imani let herself hope they could find their way back to how things were. That maybe this was a new beginning. But reality came crashing back a few days later. As Imani was walking toward the parking garage, she heard Malik's voice. She didn't mean to eavesdrop, but his tone stopped her. "She's an amazing woman, man," Malik was saying to a friend. "But I can't. I won't be that guy." "What guy?" his friend asked. "The guy," Malik said, his voice thick with frustration, "who spends his life as a footnote in Imani Carter's biography." Imani's stomach clenched. "I have to build something for myself first," Malik continued. "I have to be my own man. Otherwise, I'm just some charity case she picked up. I can't live like that." There was a pause. Then his friend asked, "So what are you going to do?" Malik's answer was quiet, but it cut through the air like a knife. "I'm going to let her go." Imani felt a profound numbness wash over her. She could handle rejection, anger, even stubborn pride. But this wasn't about him not caring. This was about him not believing in them. And that was a battle she couldn't win for him. For the first time in her life, Imani Carter admitted defeat. The next day, she stopped seeking him out. She stopped trying. With a broken heart, she let him go. Malik Thompson had been so sure that walking away from Imani Carter was the right thing to do. He had told himself their worlds were incompatible, that she deserved an equal, that he was doing them both a favor. But the moment she actually stopped trying, the silence she left behind was deafening. Everything felt wrong. At first, he told himself it was just an adjustment. But days bled into weeks, and the ache in his chest never subsided. Every morning he walked into work. Her absence was a physical presence. No more surprise encounters in the hallway. No more witty banter. No more Imani. It was then that the crushing realization hit him. She had never been the problem. He was. He had been so consumed by the idea that she saw him as less than that he'd failed to see that she never had. She had never pitied him, never looked down on him, never treated him as anything but a man she was drawn to. He was the one who had built the walls. He was the one who refused to believe in her feelings for him. He was the one who had pushed her away. And now she was gone. It was entirely his fault. One afternoon, heading for the exit, he saw her. Imani was near the main entrance, deep in conversation with a man whose suit probably cost more than Malik's rent for a year. The man was tall, handsome, and carried himself with an aura of effortless power. Malik froze. A painful twist started in his gut as he watched them. Imani laughed at something the man said, her face open and relaxed. And in that moment, Malik was certain she had moved on. His chest tightened. Did he really think she would just wait for him? She was Imani Carter. She could have anyone. And it looked like she'd found someone. He turned and walked away before she could spot him. But the image was seared into his mind. He threw himself into his work, hoping to numb the pain. It didn't work. He went out with friends, tried to distract himself. But every place held a memory of her. The little cafe, the vending machine where he'd learned the truth, the bus stop where it all began. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore. He had to fix this. He had to tell her the truth before it was too late. It was the night of the annual Carter Enterprises Gala. Hundreds of investors, executives, and city elites mingled in a glittering ballroom. Malik Thompson had no business being there. And yet, there he was, standing amidst the sea of tuxedos and evening gowns, his heart hammering against his ribs as he scanned the room. And then he saw her. Imani was near the stage in a stunning black gown, the picture of grace and power as she chatted with a circle of dignitaries. She was breathtaking. And for the first time since this whole mess began, Malik wasn't afraid. Taking a deep, steadying breath, he started walking. A ripple of murmurs followed him. A maintenance worker in his street clothes, crashing the CEO's gala? It was unheard of, but Malik didn't care. His eyes were fixed on one person. He walked right up to her, stopping just a few feet away. She blinked, her composure momentarily faltering. Malik, for a second that stretched into an eternity, they just stared at each other. Then, before his nerve could fail, he spoke, his voice clear and strong. I was wrong. The entire ballroom seemed to fall silent. Imani looked at him, completely stunned. What did you say? He took a sharp breath, his voice raw with emotion. I was wrong. To walk away. To think you deserve better. To think that what we had, that it didn't matter. Imani's own breath hitched. He took another step closer. I don't care about the money, he declared. I don't care about the company or what anyone in this room thinks, his gaze locked on hers, fierce and unwavering. The only thing I care about is you, Imani. The silence was thick with anticipation. Then, a slow, beautiful smile spread across Imani's face. And just like that, the walls between them finally seemed to crumble. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Imani Carter felt a flicker of something she thought she'd lost for good. Hope. Standing before Malik, hearing those words, seeing the conviction in his eyes, it was almost enough. Almost. As much as she wanted to throw herself into his arms and tell him she'd been waiting, a sliver of fear remained. What if this was a momentary impulse? What if, a month from now, the old insecurities crept back in? She needed to be sure. She needed to know this was real and that he wouldn't walk away again. Imani took a slow, calming breath. Malik, she began, her voice softer now. He leaned in, his expression full of hopeful expectation. She met his gaze. If you mean that, if you really want to be with me, she paused, then delivered her terms. Then prove it. His brow furrowed. Prove it how? Imani nodded. You left because you felt you weren't my equal. Because you needed to build something for yourself before you could be with me. He swallowed hard, the memory of his own words echoing between them. So if you believe in us, she continued, then show me. Show me you're willing to fight for this. Not with grand gestures, but with real action. Malik stared at her for a long moment. Then a look of understanding dawned on his face. He didn't argue. He didn't ask for an easier path. He simply said, with absolute certainty, "I will." True to his word, Malik started the very next day. He enrolled in online business courses, immersing himself in study. He balanced his full-time job with late nights spent poring over textbooks, pushing himself harder than ever before. There were times when the exhaustion was overwhelming, but whenever he felt like giving up, he thought of her. He was doing this for himself, for her, for the future they might have. Unbeknownst to him, Imani was watching. They weren't together, but she never stopped caring. She pulled a few subtle strings, an anonymous tip about a scholarship, a quiet recommendation to a mentor, small things that opened doors he deserved. But mostly she just waited to see if his resolve would hold, waited to see if this time he wouldn't run. Over the months that followed, they kept in contact. Texts, occasional coffee meetings, late-night phone calls. There were no labels, no declarations, just two people in a holding pattern waiting for the right time. And as she watched him grow, Imani realized he wasn't just proving himself to her. He was proving himself to himself. And she knew then that they had a chance. The past year had been the most grueling and transformative of Malik Thompson's life. He had worked relentlessly, juggling his job and his studies, pushing past every limit he thought he had. And now, standing in the office of his own small but thriving tech maintenance company, he knew every ounce of sweat had been worth it. It wasn't a massive corporation, not yet, but it was his, built from the ground up on his own terms. He was no longer an employee in someone else's empire. He was a founder. And more importantly, he was finally ready for Imani. He sat at his new desk, staring at a small envelope. Inside was a single bus ticket, identical to the one he had given her on that rainy evening. This time, however, it wasn't for a ride home. It was for a ride back to him. He took a deep breath and scribbled a note on a small card, slipping it inside. Asterisk, I've built something new, but my feelings for you have never changed. I love you, Imani asterisk. He sent it. When Imani Carter received the envelope, she nearly dropped it. Her fingers trembled as she pulled out the ticket and the handwritten note. Her breath caught in her throat. For a long moment, she just stared at his words, letting them sink in. Then, before a single doubt could surface, she grabbed her coat and ran. The city was a blur as Imani hurried down the familiar streets, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. When she reached the bus stop, she saw him. He was standing there, hands in his pockets, looking the same and yet entirely different. He had grown into himself. He was the man he had always wanted to be. But when he smiled at her, that same infuriating, heart-stopping smile, she knew he was still her Malik. The kind man who'd given a stranger his last few dollars. The stubborn man who had challenged her, frustrated her, and made her fall completely and irrevocably in love. She didn't slow down. She didn't hesitate. She launched herself into his arms. Malik caught her, holding her so tightly it felt as though he might never let go. And this time he wouldn't. As they stood wrapped in each other's arms, the city bustled around them. Cars honked, people rushed past. The world didn't stop. But for them, in that moment, nothing else mattered. Imani pulled back just enough to look up at him, her eyes shining. You took your time, she teased. He chuckled softly. Told you I don't give up easy. Good, she smiled. Because neither do I. Not anymore. And there, with the world as their witness, she kissed him, sealing a promise that had been forged in kindness, tested by pride, and finally realized through love. This time, there were no obstacles, no doubts, no distance. Just Imani and Malik. Together. Sometimes, love isn't about where you start, but about who you are willing to become. Imani and Malik came from different worlds, but their hearts spoke the same language. Because true love doesn't see status or wealth. It sees the soul, and it always finds a way.